My name is Cecilia. I am 34 years old, and the night everything collapsed, I was standing barefoot on the cold bathroom floor, staring at a pregnancy test that refused to lie. The room smelled faintly of lavender soap, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. 2 lines, clear, merciless. I remember whispering, "No, please," as if the plastic stick could hear me, as if denial alone could rewrite reality. I was married. I was loved. And yet, the child growing inside me did not belong to my husband. Charles was in the living room, folding laundry the way he always did on Sunday nights. Calm, careful, unaware that our entire life was about to split in two. I pressed my back against the bathroom door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, hugging my knees like a frightened child. In that moment, every choice I had made replayed itself in my head, not as memories, but as accusations. I had not planned to fall in love with someone else. That is the lie people like me tell themselves. The truth is uglier. I planned the meetings. I planned the lies. I planned the excuses. Passion does not arrive suddenly. It grows quietly in the spaces where honesty should live. And by the time I realized what I was risking, I was already too deep to stop. Charles and I had been married for 8 years. 8 quiet, steady years, built on routines, shared jokes, and the kind of love that doesn't scream but stays. He was gentle in ways the world rarely is. He remembered how I took my coffee, how I hated loud arguments, how I needed silence after a long day. He loved me without conditions, and that should have been enough. It should have been everything. But somewhere along the way, I began to confuse stability with emptiness. I told myself I was missing something unnamed, something undefined. And when another man looked at me as if I were still a mystery, I let myself believe that feeling mattered more than the life I already had. The affair began quietly, too quietly. No dramatic declarations, no sudden passion, just conversations that lasted a little too long, messages deleted right after being read, smiles I hid when Charles walked into the room. I convinced myself it wasn't real betrayal yet. That lie lasted until the first time I chose him over my husband without hesitation. When I finally told the other man I was late, he laughed nervously and said it was probably stress. I believed him because believing felt easier than facing the truth. But when the days passed and my body began to change, fear settled deep in my chest like a stone. And now, sitting on that bathroom floor, I understood something terrible. There was no version of this story where everyone walked away unharmed. I flushed the toilet just to create noise, then washed my face until my eyes were red. I practiced neutral expressions in the mirror, rehearsed lies I already knew would fail. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Charles looked up and smiled. That smile still haunts me. "Everything okay?" he asked, folding a towel with precise care. "Yes," I said. And that single word was the final moment of peace we would ever share. That night, I barely slept. I lay beside him, listening to his breathing, wondering how a man who trusted me so completely could be destroyed by someone he loved. My hand rested on my stomach, and I felt no joy, no excitement, only dread. The child inside me was innocent, but the truth surrounding that child was anything but. I knew I had to tell him. I knew delay would only deepen the wound. And yet, when morning came, I still hesitated. Because once the words left my mouth, there would be no way back. Some confessions don't ask for forgiveness. They demand consequences. By the time Charles poured us coffee and asked what I wanted to do that weekend, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of losing him. I was afraid of living in a world where I deserved to. And I had no idea that when I finally told him the truth, the silence that followed would hurt more than any scream ever could. I told myself I would speak calmly. I told myself I would choose the right moment, the right words, the right tone. But truth is not a polished thing. It comes out jagged, bleeding, impossible to hold without getting hurt. Charles sat at the kitchen table, one elbow resting beside his mug, the newspaper open but unread. He had that familiar look, half awake, half thinking, like his mind was already planning the day. Sunlight spilled across his hands, and for a second I almost turned around, almost pretended none of it was real, almost saved myself from the moment I had created. "Charles," I said, and my voice cracked on his name. He looked up immediately. His eyes sharpened with concern. "Cecilia, what's wrong?" I sat across from him, but I couldn't touch the chair back. My palms hovered in the air like I didn't deserve to rest them anywhere in our home. I opened my mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. "I need to tell you something," I managed. He folded the newspaper slowly, carefully, as if making space for whatever I was about to place between us. "Okay," he said. "Tell me." There are moments where you can feel your life splitting into two futures. One where you stay silent and poison everything slowly. Another where you speak and destroy it quickly. I chose the second. "I'm pregnant." His face changed instantly. Not with joy, not with disbelief, but with a stunned softness. Hope rose in his eyes like a fragile flame. "Pregnant," he repeated, almost whispering. "Cecilia, are you—" And that's when I shattered him. "It's not yours." The words fell into the kitchen like glass, the kind that doesn't just break. It scatters. Charles didn't move. He didn't blink. For a moment he looked almost frozen, as if his mind had rejected what his ears had heard. "What?" he said, quiet. "I'm so sorry," I rushed out. "I didn't want this. I didn't plan—" He held up his hand, not angry, not dramatic, just begging for silence. "Stop," he said, and his voice was still calm, which made it worse. "Say that again." Slowly. I shook my head, tears already slipping down my cheeks. "Charles, I made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm pregnant, and it's not your child." His jaw tightened. He stared at the table like the wood might explain it. And then, in the most heartbreaking voice I've ever heard, he asked, "How long?" That question crushed me because it wasn't just about time. It was about everything hidden inside that time. Every night I came home late, every smile I forced, every "I'm tired" that masked guilt. Every moment he trusted me while I betrayed him. "A few months," I whispered. He exhaled through his nose, a small sound like pain being forced back down. "And I didn't know," he said. Not accusing, just broken. "I didn't know." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away as if my touch was suddenly dangerous. "Who is he?" he asked. That hesitation was a second betrayal, because it meant I was still protecting someone else in front of my husband. The truth is, I was protecting myself from his reaction, from the full consequences. But Charles read hesitation like a language. "You don't want to say," he murmured. "No," I said quickly. I'll tell you. His name is—" But I couldn't. I couldn't because once I said it, it would turn from an idea into a reality Charles could hate. And my cowardice made the air heavier. Charles stood up slowly. He didn't push the chair back. It scraped harshly against the floor, the first loud sound between us. He walked to the sink, stared out the window, and for a long moment he just breathed, like breathing was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "I loved you," he said finally, still facing the window. "I love you too," I whispered, desperate. He turned his head slightly, and his eyes were wet. Not with rage, with grief. "Don't," he said. "Not right now." I stood, my legs trembling. "Charles, please, we can go to counseling. We can fix this." I'll do anything. I'll cut him off. I swear. I'll. He turned around fully then, and the look on his face stopped me cold. It was the look of someone seeing a stranger wearing the face of the person they trusted most. Anything? He repeated, voice flat. Yes, I said, sobbing. Anything. He nodded once, almost gently. Then tell me, he said, when you were with him, were you thinking about me at all? I opened my mouth, and nothing came out, because the truth was unbearable. There were moments when I did think of Charles, and instead of stopping, I pushed the thought away. Like swatting at a fly. Like his love was something inconvenient. And Charles understood everything from my silence. He looked down at his wedding ring, turning it slowly as if it had become unfamiliar. Then he slipped it off his finger and placed it on the table beside my coffee mug. That ring hitting the wood should not have been so loud, but it was. I can't, he said. My whole body went numb. Charles, don't do this. Please. He didn't yell. He didn't call me names. He didn't throw anything. He simply walked past me, toward the hallway, toward our bedroom. And I followed, barefoot, crying, begging like a woman watching her home burn. He opened the closet, pulled out a suitcase, and began filling it with shirts. Not angrily, methodically, like a man packing for a trip he never wanted to take. What are you doing? I choked. He didn't look at me. Leaving, he said. You can't just leave, I cried. This is our home. He paused then. He finally looked at me. And I saw something in his face that made my stomach drop even more than the pregnancy ever could. He wasn't leaving the house. He was leaving me. Our home, he repeated softly. Cecilia, you made it a place I don't recognize. I stepped closer, hands shaking. It was one mistake. He gave a small, broken laugh. Not humorous, not cruel. Just disbelief. One mistake, he echoed. No, a mistake is spilling coffee. A mistake is missing an exit. This was a choice. Over and over. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed. My chest hurt like it was caving in. What about the baby? I whispered, almost too ashamed to ask. He froze for a second. His shoulders rose and fell. And then he said something that still wakes me up some nights. That baby didn't do anything wrong, he murmured. But every time I look at it, I'll remember what you did. He zipped the suitcase closed with a final sound that felt like the end of an era. I crawled off the bed and grabbed his sleeve. Please, I begged, don't leave me like this. Charles stared at my hand on his sleeve like it was a stranger's hand. And then slowly, he pulled away. I'm not leaving you, he said, voice quiet and deadly. You left me first. I'm just finally catching up. Then he walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, toward the front door. I followed him, my sobs echoing off the walls, my heart beating like a panic alarm. At the doorway, he paused. He looked back once, just once. His eyes moved over me, my wet face, my trembling hands, my swollen terror. And for a split second, I thought he might come back. I thought he might soften, might forgive, might stay. But instead, he said, I hope one day you understand what you did. And then he opened the door and stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a gentle click, and that click was the loudest sound of my life. Because in that silence, I realized something horrifying. I had traded the love that would have lasted for a passion that was already disappearing, and I was pregnant with proof of it. The house didn't feel empty after Charles left. It felt hollow, like something essential had been carved out of its center. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed against my ears, heavy and suffocating. I stood in the entryway long after the door closed, staring at the place where he had been seconds before, half expecting him to come back in, to say he'd forgotten something, to say this was all a terrible misunderstanding. He never did. I slid down against the door and cried until my throat burned and my body ached. There is a particular kind of grief that comes when you realize the person who knew you best has chosen distance over you. Not because they stopped loving you, but because loving you became too painful. The days that followed blurred together. Morning light came and went. Meals were skipped. Messages from friends piled up unanswered. I told my boss I was sick. I told my mother I needed space. I told myself I deserved the loneliness, that this was the price of my choices. And yet, every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, hoping it was Charles. It never was. Instead, it was him, the other man. The one who had once made me feel alive in ways I thought I'd lost forever. He called, texted, left voicemails that grew more anxious by the hour. When I finally answered, my voice sounded unfamiliar even to me. "He knows," I said. There was a pause. "Knows what?" "Everything." Silence stretched between us, then a breath. "Cecilia, I didn't think—" "I'm pregnant," I said, cutting him off. And he left. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind that carries fear inside it. "Are you sure it's mine?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was unreasonable, but because of how quickly love vanished from his voice and was replaced by calculation. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." He exhaled slowly. Okay, we'll figure it out." But something had shifted. I could feel it. The warmth that once wrapped around his words was gone. What remained was obligation, not devotion. Responsibility, not passion. And for the first time, I wondered if I had mistaken excitement for love. We met a few days later at a small cafe across town, far from places Charles and I used to go. I chose a seat near the window, my back straight, my hands folded over my stomach like a shield. When he walked in, I barely recognized the man who once made my heart race. His smile was tense. His eyes darted around the room, as if being seen with me was suddenly dangerous. He sat down and reached for my hand. I pulled back. "I lost my husband," I said quietly. "Don't touch me like nothing happened." His jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for this," he said. Neither did the child inside me. I wanted to scream. But instead, I whispered, "Neither did I." We talked in circles. About options, about timing, about money, about how complicated everything had become. Not once did he say, "I love you." Not once did he say, "We'll be okay." And I realized with a sinking certainty that whatever fantasy I had built around him had already begun to crumble. When we parted ways, he kissed my cheek like a distant relative and said he needed time to think. Time. The same word Charles never asked for. Charles had seen the truth and acted immediately. This man needed space to decide whether I was still worth the trouble. That night, alone in the bed Charles and I once shared, I placed my hand over my stomach and felt a strange mixture of terror and protectiveness. I whispered an apology to the child growing inside me. An apology for the chaos, for the broken home, for the love story that ended before it could even begin. Weeks passed. My body changed in small, undeniable ways. Nausea in the mornings, fatigue that clung to my bones, a softness where flatness used to be. Each change was a reminder that no matter how much I wanted to rewind time, life was moving forward without mercy. I tried to reach Charles. I sent messages I deleted before he could read them. I wrote long emails I never sent. I rehearsed apologies that sounded hollow even in my own head. What do you say to someone whose trust you didn't just break, but shattered? One afternoon, I finally called him. It rang twice before going to voicemail. I hung up without leaving a message, my chest tight with a pain that felt sharper than rejection. It felt final. The loneliness grew heavier. Friends stopped checking in. My mother's concern turned into quiet disappointment, and the man who was supposed to be by my side during this pregnancy began canceling plans, answering messages hours late, offering excuses that sounded thin even to him. One evening, as I sat on the couch watching shadows stretch across the walls, it hit me with brutal clarity. I had lost the man who loved me unconditionally, and I was about to raise a child with a man who loved me conditionally, if at all. The irony was unbearable. I pressed my forehead against the window and stared out at the darkening street, wondering how a life could unravel so completely from choices that once felt harmless. And that was the moment I realized something else, something that terrified me even more than being alone. I wasn't afraid of motherhood. I was afraid of facing it without the one person who would have been an incredible father. The first time I heard the heartbeat, I cried so hard the nurse had to pause the exam. The sound was fast, urgent, impossibly alive. A rhythm that didn't care about my regrets or my broken marriage. In that small, dimly lit room, with gel on my skin and a flickering image on a screen, I felt something crack open inside me. Not guilt, not shame, but a fierce, unfamiliar sense of responsibility. This life was happening whether I was ready or not. I walked out of the clinic alone, clutching a grainy printout to my chest like it was something sacred. Outside, couples stood together, laughing nervously, hands intertwined. I turned away quickly, swallowing the sharp envy rising in my throat. That should have been Charles beside me. He would have asked questions, made jokes to hide his anxiety, squeezed my hand too tightly during the ultrasound. The image was so vivid it hurt. That night, I sent him a message I knew he might never read. I heard the heartbeat today. I just wanted you to know. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, waiting for the typing dots that never came. The other man drifted further away as my pregnancy became impossible to ignore. His calls turned into texts, his texts into silence. When I confronted him, my voice steadied despite the storm inside me. He sighed like a man exhausted by a problem he hadn't planned to solve. I can help financially, he said, but I can't be involved. Not like that. Not like that. As if love were an optional upgrade. As if this child were a subscription he could cancel. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Something in me had hardened. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the instinct to protect what little dignity I had left. When the call ended, I blocked his number and cried into a pillow until the sobs turned silent and dry. From that moment on, it was just me. Pregnancy has a way of stripping you down to your rawest self. There is no room for pretending when your body aches, your emotions swing wildly, and your future feels terrifyingly uncertain. I learned how strong loneliness can be, how it can sit beside you at dinner, sleep next to you at night, follow you into every room. I talked to my baby constantly. In the shower, on the couch. While lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, I told them stories about the world, about kindness, about love. I avoided talking about their father. I didn't know how to explain absence without turning it into blame. Sometimes, late at night, I would imagine Charles somewhere else, maybe in a small apartment, maybe at a friend's place, trying to rebuild his life. I wondered if he hated me, if he missed me, if he ever touched his ring out of habit and felt the echo of what we were. Months passed. My belly grew round and undeniable. Strangers smiled at me on the street, congratulated me, asked when I was due. I smiled back, playing the role of a woman whose life made sense. No one saw the nights I cried quietly, or the way my heart still tightened every time I passed places Charles and I used to go. Then one afternoon, I saw him. It was unplanned, cruelly coincidental. I was leaving a grocery store, struggling with heavy bags, when I spotted a familiar figure near the parking lot. Taller than I remembered. Thinner. His hair slightly longer. Charles. For a second, I considered turning away, pretending I hadn't seen him. But he looked up at that exact moment, and our eyes met. The world seemed to pause. He walked toward me slowly, uncertainty written all over his face. When he stopped a few feet away, his gaze dropped instinctively to my stomach. His breath caught. I saw it. The pain. The shock. The confirmation of everything he already knew, but hadn't had to face in person until now. Cecilia, he said softly. Charles, I replied. We stood there, suspended in a moment that felt heavier than months of silence. Neither of us knew where to begin. You look, he started. You look okay, then stopped. I nodded. I'm managing. His eyes lingered on my belly, then returned to my face. I'm glad, he said, and I could tell he meant it. There was no bitterness in his voice, just sadness. A deep, quiet sadness. I didn't mean to hurt you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I think about it every day. He swallowed. I know. That simple response broke me more than anger ever could have, because it meant he had truly understood, truly processed, and truly moved forward, without me. We talked for a few minutes about trivial things. Work, the weather, nothing that mattered and everything that did. When the conversation faltered, he took a step back. I should go, he said gently. I nodded, fighting tears. Take care, Charles. You too, Cecilia. He hesitated, then added, I hope you find peace. As he walked away, I realized something profound and devastating. He already had, and I was still searching for mine. Peace did not arrive after that encounter. It retreated even further, like something that sensed it wasn't welcome in a heart as restless as mine. Seeing Charles again had reopened wounds I had spent months pretending were scars. I told myself I was stronger now, that motherhood had reshaped me into someone capable of carrying pain without collapsing. But strength, I learned, does not erase longing. It only teaches you how to survive it quietly. As my due date approached, the nights grew heavier. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by aches, worries, and dreams that felt more real than waking life. In those dreams, Charles stood in the doorway of our old bedroom, watching me sleep, his expression unreadable. I would reach for him, my hand closing around nothing but air. Every time I woke up gasping, my pillow damp with tears I hadn't felt falling. I prepared the nursery alone. Pale walls. A small crib I assembled slowly, following instructions with shaking hands. Each screw tightened, felt like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I hung tiny clothes in the closet and folded blankets with care, imagining a future that felt both fragile and unstoppable. I talked to my baby about bravery, about forgiveness, about how love could exist even in broken places. Labor began on a rainy night. The sky was low and gray, the kind of weather that makes the world feel smaller. I drove myself to the hospital, gripping the steering wheel through waves of pain, my breaths shallow and controlled. In the parking lot, I sat for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the entrance, wishing, against all reason, that Charles might somehow be there, waiting. He wasn't. Inside, everything moved quickly. Bright lights, gentle voices, hands guiding me forward. The pain was unlike anything I had known, sharp and consuming, but it grounded me in the present. There was no room for regret in those hours, only endurance. When my baby was finally placed on my chest, crying and warm and impossibly small, the world narrowed to that single moment. I sobbed, not from sadness, not from guilt, but from a love so fierce it startled me. I whispered promises into their tiny ear, promises to protect, to stay, to never disappear the way so many others had. And yet, even in that sacred moment, a familiar ache surfaced. I looked around the room and saw the empty chair beside the bed, the place where a father should have been. The days after were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Nurses came and went. Visitors were few. My mother held the baby carefully, her eyes shining with pride and concern. Friends sent messages filled with congratulations and heart emojis. Everyone celebrated new life, and I smiled through it, grateful and hollow at the same time. At night, alone with my child sleeping against me, the weight of everything pressed down hard. I thought of Charles again, of how he would have held the baby, his hands steady, his smile unsure but sincere, of the life we were supposed to share. I didn't tell myself he would have forgiven me. I only allowed myself to miss him. Weeks passed. I learned the rhythms of motherhood, the feeding schedules, the sleepless nights, the quiet joy of watching a tiny chest rise and fall. Love filled the cracks where despair once lived, but it didn't erase the past. It lived alongside it, tender and persistent. One afternoon, sorting through old boxes in the closet, I found our wedding album. I hadn't known it was still there. My hands trembled as I opened it, page by page revealing smiles that felt like echoes from another lifetime. We looked so certain, so unbreakable. I closed the album quickly, my heart pounding. That night, after putting my baby to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to Charles. Not an apology. Those had come and gone. This was something else. Gratitude, truth, release. I wrote about the baby, about the strength he once showed me, about how loving him had changed me forever, even in loss. I didn't know if I would ever send it. As dawn crept through the window, I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. My hands lingered there, resting on paper and possibility. Some endings don't close with slammed doors or final words. They end softly, with acceptance. But I wasn't ready yet, because deep down, I still believed that some stories refuse to stay unfinished. I kept the letter hidden for weeks, tucked inside a drawer beneath folded clothes and unpaid bills. It waited there quietly, like a question I wasn't brave enough to ask. Life moved forward anyway. Days filled with diapers and lullabies, nights softened by the steady breathing of my child against my chest. I learned how to function on little sleep, how to smile without explanation, how to carry joy and sorrow in the same arms. Sometimes, while rocking my baby in the dim light of the living room, I would imagine Charles standing in the doorway, watching silently. In those moments, I didn't ask him to forgive me. I only wanted him to see that something good had survived the wreckage. That love, even born from the worst mistake of my life, had not turned cruel. One afternoon, as autumn settled in, a message appeared on my phone. His name. Just his name. My heart raced so violently I had to sit down. "I found something of yours while unpacking old boxes," the message read. "I think you might want it back." I stared at the screen, fingers hovering. 1,000 replies formed and dissolved. Finally, I typed, "Okay, thank you. Nothing more, nothing less." We agreed to meet in a quiet park near the river, a place neutral enough to hold our history without suffocating us. I arrived early, pushing the stroller slowly along the path, my thoughts tangled. When I saw him approaching, my breath caught. He looked different again, calmer maybe, or simply further away from the man I once knew. He smiled when he saw the baby, tentative and respectful. "They're beautiful," he said. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside. We sat on a bench beneath bare branches. He handed me a small box. Inside was a bracelet I thought I'd lost years ago, a gift from him on our first anniversary. I closed the box gently. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," he said. "I didn't know if I could," I admitted. Silence settled between us, not heavy this time, but careful. He watched the baby sleep, his expression unreadable. "I read your letter," he said quietly. My chest tightened. "I never sent it." He nodded. "You didn't have to." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw a man who had healed in ways I hadn't yet. Not untouched, not unscarred, but whole enough to stand without anger. "I'm not here to reopen anything," he continued. "I just wanted you to know I don't hate you." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "That means more than you know." He stood, giving me space. "Take care, Cecilia. You too, Charles." As he walked away, I felt something inside me finally loosen. Not hope for us, not regret demanding punishment, just peace, fragile and real. That night, holding my child close, I understood something I had been resisting for a long time. Redemption doesn't always come as forgiveness from others. Sometimes it comes as the courage to live honestly after everything has fallen apart. I whispered a promise into the dark, not to be perfect, just to be present, to choose love carefully, to never confuse passion with worth again. And for the first time since that night on the bathroom floor, I believed that my downfall did not have to be the end of my story. Motherhood has a way of slowing time while speeding it up all at once. Days stretched endlessly, yet months slipped through my fingers without warning. My child grew heavier in my arms, stronger in their cries, more curious with every passing week. And somewhere in that quiet evolution, I began to recognize myself again. Not the woman I had been before everything broke, but someone reshaped by loss, responsibility, and a love that asked for nothing in return. I moved to a smaller apartment closer to the river. It wasn't much, but it felt like a fresh page. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched, but every corner held intention. I chose light where I once chose distraction, simplicity where I once chased intensity. At night, after my child fell asleep, I would sit by the window and watch reflections ripple across the water, letting the stillness settle inside me. There were moments of guilt that returned without warning. Sudden, sharp memories triggered by songs, by scents, by the sound of laughter drifting in from neighboring balconies. In those moments, I allowed myself to feel them fully instead of pushing them away. I learned that regret doesn't fade when ignored. It softens when acknowledged. One evening, while sorting through old photographs, I found a picture of Charles and me at the beach, taken years before everything unraveled. We were sunburned and laughing, hair tangled by wind, arms wrapped around a future we believed was certain. I studied his face carefully, not with longing, but with gratitude. Loving him had taught me what real safety felt like. Losing him taught me the cost of forgetting that. I didn't reach out again. I didn't need to. Some connections don't require maintenance to remain meaningful. They exist as quiet truths inside us, shaping who we become long after they end. As my child took their first steps, I felt something shift permanently. Watching them fall, cry, and stand again reminded me that failure is not final. It is instructive, necessary, beautiful in its own way. I realized then that I didn't want my child to grow up hearing a story about a mother defined by her worst mistake. I wanted them to know a woman who learned, who stayed, who chose better every day after. People often asked me if I regretted how things turned out. I learned to pause before answering. Regret is a complicated word. I regretted the pain I caused. I regretted the lies. But the child sleeping in the next room was not a regret. They were a reminder that even broken choices can lead to something worth protecting. Late one night, while rocking my child to sleep, I felt a quiet gratitude settle over me. Not for the pain, but for the clarity it brought. Passion had once blinded me. Loss had taught me how to see. And that lesson stayed. There are mornings now when sunlight fills the apartment and I don't feel the weight of the past pressing on my chest. I wake up to small sounds, soft footsteps, a quiet hum, the gentle call of a child who knows I will come. These moments are simple, almost ordinary, and that is what makes them extraordinary. Once, I chased feelings that burned fast and bright. Now, I cherish the ones that stay. Sometimes, when the city is quiet and the river reflects the sky like a promise, I think about the woman I was. I don't judge her anymore. I understand her fears, her confusion, her hunger to feel seen, but I no longer let her choices define me. They inform me, yes, but they do not own me. I tell my child stories at night, not fairy tales filled with perfect endings, but gentle truths shaped for young ears. Stories about honesty, about listening to your own conscience, about how love isn't measured by intensity, but by presence. I want them to grow up knowing that real love does not demand destruction to feel real. There are still days when a familiar ache returns. When I hear a laugh that sounds like Charles's, or pass someone with his posture, his quiet way of moving through the world. In those moments, I let the feeling pass through me like a wave. I don't cling to it. I don't fight it. I honor it for what it was. A chapter that mattered deeply, even if it could not last. I never remarried. Not because I closed myself off, but because I learned to choose differently. I learned that being alone does not mean being incomplete. My life is full, in unexpected ways, in quieter ways. And in that fullness, I found something I once thought passion could give me: peace. On my child's birthday each year, I light a candle and make a silent wish. Not for forgiveness, not for erased mistakes, but for wisdom. The kind that grows slowly, through experience, through pain, through reflection. The kind that stays. If there is one truth my story holds, it is this: love can survive even the worst decisions, but it does not always survive unchanged. Sometimes it transforms, sometimes it leaves, and sometimes it teaches us how to love better the next time. I don't know what the future holds. None of us ever do. But I face it now without running, without hiding, without confusing desire for destiny. I face it with open eyes and a steady heart. Pregnant with her lover's child, I thought passion had saved me. In losing everything, I learned it was never passion that would. It was honesty. It was responsibility. It was love that stays when excitement fades. And that understanding, hard-earned and deeply human, became my redemption.